My name is Ellie Kim. I am the Director of Strategic Partnership with ARMA Canada. We are excited to be partnering with Shinydocs for today's webinar on AI-powered information management at SaskEnergy. We all know that data is growing exponentially. In the recent study, Industry Watch by AIM says that organizations expect the volume of information to grow by 4 times in the next 2 years. Another report by Forrester says that organizations' budget on ECM is decreasing, yet we are expected to produce more, create more ways to be more efficient while cost saving. Many of us also recognize that the introduction of artificial intelligence is inevitable in the information management industry. But what does that look like? Today's webinar will focus on these challenges and topics and help you imagine ways artificial intelligence can boost your ECM program. Thank you, Shinydocs and SaskEnergy, for organizing this webinar, and to you, David.
Thanks, Ellie. I'm David Yoon from Shinydocs, and I'm pleased to introduce today's session entitled AI-Powered Information Management at SaskEnergy. Brought to you by Norm Friend, who is the Business Solutions Integrator, Information Services, SaskEnergy, which delivers natural gas to 93% of the communities in the Canadian province of Saskatchewan. We'll talk about how SaskEnergy establishes a unified approach to information and how they are tackling the unstructured content dilemma. And with that, I'll hand it off to Norm.
Thanks, Ellie. Thanks, David. I will get right into my presentation for today. So, today's information management, creating customer value through innovation. The reason why I gave it this title is I've been having a number of meetings with a number of our executives in terms of how we can improve information management here at SaskEnergy. And throughout this presentation, I'd like to talk about a couple things. One, today's information dilemma. I think everyone on the call here recognizes where we are today. And the next step is really, how do we change how we view information? This is not just even within this group. This is, as a corporation, how do we change how we view information? I'll get into some of the information understanding and then bringing it all together in terms of what our process has been locally over the last year with some of our content analytics. And then finally, why does it matter? Like, why are we doing this? We all know about the concept of exponential growth for information. That has been known for decades now. The problem is our workforce does not exponentially grow. With the amount of data and information, as Ellie mentioned, 4 times in the next couple of years, I think we often underestimate that growth. We live in a very interesting world within SaskEnergy because we have information that gets created by humans. We have projects, but we also have information that's created by machines. So we have all of our operational scanners and pumps. There's a ton of other information like sensors and devices that we're capturing as well. And so when you look at this overall growth, it's unsustainable. The first thing we had to do was change how we viewed information. And one of the things that we've started looking is changing our view. And what I mean by that is I've been in this industry for the ECM world for 20 years now. And IT, technology, has always typically had an application-centric approach. So we as an organization have a vision and a strategy. Our case, vision and strategy is we want our customers to be first. So we set goals and objectives within each of our programs. And then we start looking at systems and applications that will help meet those goals. We set up the infrastructure, and then the last thing we look at is information. The problem with an application-centric approach is, first, reusing data becomes difficult. It's locked within specific applications and that application's limitations. Point solutions often don't consider the overall process. Case in point here, we do work orders. Sometimes that work order information starts in one application and then has to go to another application. And so how does that information get passed over? It's unable to easily tie those related pieces of information because, again, they're locked within the silos of applications. And then often the information requirements are constrained by the application requirements itself. So one of the things we're trying to do here is change that mindset by making it about the information first. So we still have vision and goals. For example, increasing customer value. Well, then we can start looking at the information that's consumed by those customers, and then we can start looking at solutions and applications and systems that help drive that value that we're looking to get out out of those visions and strategies. So it's a very different way of looking at how we create value within the IT world. So the first thing we did is we wanted to set a foundation for a corporate information model. The reason why we needed this corporate information model is a number of reasons. The benefits that it provides us are things like consistent across applications and platforms. The idea behind this model is I could go to any group within the business and talk to them about information and make it relevant to them. So in our case, if you look at our model here, this is again a very high-level conceptual model of our information. But in the top left, we have asset management. Asset management, we have work, outages, inspections, projects, all related to assets. Human resources are assigned to assets or consume assets. So the idea behind the information model was to create something that was simple and effective. It's consistent across applications. So if I go to my HCM, my human capital management group, they're going to fit into human resources, and we can start talking about the information that they manage and then the applications that are managing that. It helps us satisfy things like RIM compliance and records management for retention, because often those objects, the business entities, the information will have those consistent records retentions. It also helps us identify high value and high risk information. What I mean by that is not all information in our organization is equal. There are certain pieces of information that have a higher probability of coming back for regulatory or litigation purposes. And so overlaying on top of our corporate information model is defining a risk score. So in our organization, we have a higher value of things related to our assets because that's what we do. Other organizations may have different types of information that has higher value, again, depending on what that organization is responsible for. So it allows us to define what information is of value to us, and then we can focus more of our attention on that information. And finally, it applies to both data and content. Often when you have structures, models, the model may be specific to either unstructured or structured. Whereas it doesn't matter the application, the system, the information will still be able to apply based on our corporate information model. So our first step was, let's all talk the same language. Because I've got terabytes of stuff and petabytes of stuff that I need to tackle, figure out super quickly, and I need a model that's going to be sustainable across any repository that I want to start crawling. Right now, we have old mailboxes from Exchange, we have network drives, we have old SharePoint sites. There are all these dark repositories of information, and we needed a model that satisfies all of those content repositories as well as any leading applications that manages the information or the processes related to said information. That was our first step, is let's define this corporate information model and get buy-in from the organization to say, let's all talk the same language. Once we established that, then we said, all right, how are we going to now tackle and make all of this unknown content known? And this is when we started engaging with Shinydocs. So using content analytics and AI to classify corporate information. So we have this model. Now we want to get to a point where we understand this. That is a journey. If I were to look at any organization that I've worked with over the last 20 years, and SaskEnergy is no different, we all end up sitting here close to this manage. And sometimes we have completely unmanaged content. And so our goal throughout this journey is to get to a point where data can manage itself. It has the intelligence based on stuff that we've fed it and the direction that we've given it, to find out what that information is and manage itself, as opposed to relying on either a user or not being managed at all. So this was sort of our journey. My goal is to get to a point where we can understand. And that's really my initial goal, is let's understand it. And then we can start looking at growing and improving until a point you have data managing itself. When you get there, that's when things like predictive analytics come into play. That's where you can take advantage of making those smart decisions by knowing what that information is. Now, how we get to that understanding is what we'll talk about in a couple of slides. Why user-led migrations don't work. Historically, when we've looked at applications or platforms that manage content, in our world, it could be anything from Alfresco to SharePoint, Office 365, OpenText, Documentum. I mean, there's a whole slew of them. Often when you look at historical, older data and decades of old content, user-led migrations don't work. The volume of content is too large. Users don't have the time. The information grows exponentially, but our workforce does not. And so we have to be more efficient and we have to be smarter with how we figure out what that information is. Often you get historical perspectives that are lost. I have a folder called David's Stuff that sits into our network drive, and David's gone. I have no idea what David's stuff was. It might have been important, but all I know is it's called David's Stuff. And so you lose a lot of that historical perspective of information. Users don't have the knowledge. We have a new workforce coming in, and the last thing they want to try to do is figure out where hundreds and thousands of documents that they need, or where are their drawings, or where is the information that they need to do their job. And they struggle to find that information. And like I said, for us, we have decades of old content that is just sitting stagnant in our repositories. For all of these reasons, we need to rely on technology to be successful to understand our information. We are creating too much of it to be able to keep up with it from a human perspective. And so that's why we went down this transformational journey. How do we do it? We started with basic understanding. This is super important because, as I mentioned, not all information is equal. And so what we wanted to do was start with the first step, which is really what I'm calling cleansing, or removing the noise. Initially, and every document that we have, again, it doesn't, regardless of the repository, we have a whole bunch of stuff about that document hidden within it. So the first thing we do is we do a crawl, and we build out an index. And part of that crawl is to extract any metadata that might exist for that document. And I mean any metadata that might exist for a document. Think about a picture that I've taken on my phone that I might have uploaded somewhere on a W drive. Embedded in that could be things like my land location, where I actually was standing when I took that picture. That's super important for me to be able to associate that with an asset or a piece of pipe at a particular geographic location. So we want to extract as much of that metadata as possible. Once we've actually collected and created this index, the next stage was really to remove our duplicates. I'll talk a little bit about what our initial findings and results were, just to give you an idea in terms of what we were able to accomplish just with the noise. But the duplicates were the second piece. It mentions this hash code comparison. Every document has a unique hash code to it. This simply just does a hash code comparison, true duplicates. When you get into the further training side, and this is where you can get to near duplicates and define some of those other patterns, but this is just purely what is a duplicate. And then the final stage was what we call ROT, which stands for redundant, obsolete, and trivial. We sat down with our legal and records management group to start defining what are some of the ROT rules that we can apply in our organization. Some of them were pretty easy. Find any 0-byte file. So it's a document that's 0 bytes, empty. That is considered trivial. Give me anything that has the word wedding, or we define some standard rot where we can say, I can apply this to all the index and say, this is rot. And so that was really our first stage is, I just want to cleanse the mess. I always picture hoarders. And so if the minimum we can do is get rid of a whole bunch of noise, then let's figure out where the stuff is that's of value. And that really comes into the second stage of our process for content analytics. So in the second phase, we start getting into text crawling. So this is when we start doing full text extraction on content. And so we will take all of our content and actually pull the actual full text extraction of that content where possible. Obviously, things like JPEGs or images, you're not going to be able to get any of that full text, but we want to extract as much of that as possible. Then we start working with classification. So this is where things like our CARS or classification retention schedule, defining insights, business classifications. And again, this is about the alignment of our corporate information model of let's find those buckets, start putting them into those buckets, and then we can start refining, training, doing your pattern matching, your natural language clustering, all of the additional features that you get within the AI framework, you can start applying to those different buckets in those different areas. This is our overall process for crawling, identifying rot and duplicates, looking to start classifying, finding insights, and then start training the index based on stuff that we keep feeding it. Now, the one thing is important to note is, like I said, we've tackled a couple repositories for this particular year, and whether these were emails or whether these were network drives or SharePoint content, it did not matter. It is agnostic to the application that we're pulling from. I can build an entire index for everything, or I can build indexes specific to each department or group, depending on how I want to actually work with the business to help figure out what's what. So the cleansing stage alone, just to give you an idea, from a results perspective, there's two charts here. One is based on the number of documents, and the second is based on the number of gigs, so the volume and size. Just by applying the cleansing. So that's crawling it, identifying duplicates, and then finally defining rot. We were able to identify within the data set that we were using almost 60% of the documents were either duplicate or considered rot. We haven't even done any training. This is purely just going after it, finding the metadata, and then applying some very basic cleansing rules. It ended up being about 42% of the overall duplicate in size. Almost immediately, we were able to identify almost 50% of the noise that was sitting in these network drives that have been sitting there for forever. And that's some easy, low-hanging fruit. Because now what we can do is focus on the rest. There's a neat analogy that I've heard before, and it's the concept of a coin shaker. So if you've got a whole bunch of coins and you throw it through a coin shaker with different size holes, it starts plucking things into each one of those things. And so this was really just let's get rid of the coins we don't care about, and now we can focus on the rest. By the way, for us to crawl and index and define this was done within a day. So once we've had defined those rot rules and we ran the scripts, within one day I was able to say we can save almost 50% from storage, from findability for users. There's multiple cost savings, but almost immediately we've eliminated a large amount, or at least what we've done is we've flagged it. I can talk a little bit about what we're planning on doing afterwards, but the idea is once we've defined the content that is of value, that still is important, that still needs to be retained, we would start looking at migrating that and any of the metadata that we've collected in the index into our leading ECMs, apply the correct classifications, ensure that the retention schedules are set, and then make sure that they get to that managed stage. And then again, moving towards that understood. So those were our initial results. Now, why this matters. This section here, I've changed it a number of times since I've done this because It really depends on who you're presenting this to. The concept of this presentation was not to get into the technical stuff of how we utilize the tool. It's understanding what is the foundation that we need to use or to create, and how do we make this successful. These are the kinds of talking points from an executive perspective that they get interested in. One, obviously, the reduction of migration costs. So even in our world, if I gave a number to our executive group, I can say within 6 years, we could save up to $3 million if we actually started crawling and doing analytics on every single one of our old repositories. The reduction in data storage costs. More and more of us are now moving into the cloud world. If anyone's ever had to do a migration into something like Office 365, you know that's going to cost you. That's going to cost you a lot. What we're trying to do is reduce not just the overall data storage costs, but also things like migration costs. To say, I'm not going to migrate 5 terabytes, I'd rather migrate 2 and save that other 3 terabytes of cost for migration. It reduces the time in finding relevant content. Again, it's that same concept of if you remove the noise, now people can start looking and focusing on the stuff that's actually relevant. And then finally, and this was a big one for us, is the reduction in risk. We are highly regulated. And so if I have a maintenance worker who's doing some work on a particular pump, I need to ensure that he has the right standard operating procedure and work instructions to work on that particular piece of pump. Part of the understanding is figuring out what information is relevant, right, and ensuring that it's at our users' fingertips so that they're doing what they need to do in a safe way. So risk was a huge mitigation for us as well in terms of we can't just keep this stuff forever, especially in litigations. In other organizations that I've worked with, when they talk about the overall cost of a litigation, it could cost anywhere from $200 to $350 per document from a legal action just to go through discovery. And so if we can reduce that again, we're saving costs on the litigations as well and the overall risk. That's sort of a message from an executive. This is why it matters to the business and to IT and to SaskEnergy as a whole. And my last slide is always about why does this matter to enterprise information management? The big reason is because, one, this is really just one piece of information governance. This is our information management wheel, enterprise information management wheel. It really talks about the different areas within information management. By going through content analytics, you can see we are actually addressing all of these other perspectives within EIM. Things like metadata, enriching metadata to make sure that information is easily accessible and findable. Quality, to ensure that the information that people have is relevant and real and right. Our overall information security. Do we have information that's sitting in these dark repositories that people should not be accessing, but they do? We try to hit all of those little pieces just by going through content analytics, finding information about what this stuff is, and then enriching that information. What we're trying to do here is create some consistency across our organization for sharing information and managing and understanding information. Establishing proper metadata standards so that we can say, I now can crawl all of this stuff, find anything that's a legal agreement, and make sure that every legal agreement has the same metadata assigned to it. It helps with things like application rationalization. With an information management, I can go to our IT folks and I say, why do I have 5 applications that are managing asset management outage? Again, it's that information-centric approach as opposed to application. I now have 5 applications. Why do I need 5? Can we rationalize some of those? Are they the right applications? Is there one that can do all 5? So it also helps us with things like application rationalization. And then again, the automate and audit information security. So again, now that we have this information in something that's consumable, semi-structured, we can report on it. We can then automate things like the movement, the application of security, the migration into our proper records repositories, etc. So from an EIM perspective, this has always been this is why this is important to me and in general. Whereas the first slide is really why is this important to our organization as a whole?
I think that is it then. And with that, I'd like to thank you for attending today's session with Norm Friend at SaskEnergy and Shinydocs Corporation. Thank you very much.